A killer's legacy. My beloved uncle, the man who had embraced me with such a comforting, familiar scent of Old Spice and sawdust after my father's funeral, had not just vanished with every penny of my inheritance, leaving my younger brother and me destitute. He carried with him a far darker secret, the insidious truth that he had orchestrated my father's death, turning a tragic accident into a cold, calculated murder. This horrifying revelation splintered my world, forcing me to confront a darkness lurking within my own family, far more profound than grief could ever encompass, leaving me to wonder what other truths lay buried beneath years of carefully constructed lies, and if I would ever truly know peace again. The salt-kissed air of San Diego, usually a balm to my soul, felt heavy and suffocating in the autumn of 2022. Each breath a struggle against an invisible weight that pressed down on my chest. Every sunrise over the Pacific felt like a cruel mockery, painting the sky with colors too vibrant for a world that had suddenly gone gray, muted by the crushing finality of loss. My father, Mateo, a man whose hands built dreams in steel and concrete, whose laugh echoed through every corner of our lives, whose presence was as solid and dependable as the foundations he laid, was gone. One moment, he was meticulously prepping his beloved fishing boat, El Sueño, the dream, for a solo trip out past Point Loma, the engine purring like a contented cat, the scent of diesel and sea salt clinging to his weathered skin. The next, a sterile Coast Guard report spoke of engine failure, a rogue wave, and a tragic, unavoidable accident that had claimed him too swiftly from the churning depths. He was 58, strong as the rebar he worked with, his forearms corded with muscle, but the ocean, they said, was unforgiving, claiming even the most seasoned sailors. I was 30, a promising architect with my own firm Rodriguez Designs, taking root in the vibrant Gaslamp Quarter, my days filled with the exciting challenge of turning abstract ideas into tangible structures. But suddenly, I felt like a child lost in a vast empty house, adrift in a world without its anchor. The house itself, nestled on a quiet, tree-lined street in Point Loma, was another of my father's creations. Every beam, every tile, every sun-drenched window held a memory. The faint, comforting smell of sawdust from his backyard workshop, the lingering scent of his pipe tobacco clinging to the old armchair where he'd read the newspaper, the vibrant bougainvillea he tended with such gentle care in the backyard, its petals a riot of fuchsia against the white stucco. It was paid off, a testament to his lifelong discipline, his quiet ambition, and a tangible piece of the $1.5 million estate he left behind, which also included Mateo Rodriguez Construction, the thriving business he'd built from the ground up with sweat, integrity, and an unshakable vision. He'd always believed in securing our future, my younger brother Leo and me, making sure we had a foundation to build our own dreams upon. Leo, only 18 then, was a recent high school graduate, his usual teenage exuberance replaced by a somber stillness, his grief a silent, hollow echo in the suddenly quiet halls of our home, unsure how to navigate a world without his hero. Into this chasm of grief, this suffocating silence, stepped my uncle Carlos. My father's younger brother, Carlos, 55, was a flamboyant figure, a perpetual dreamer whose business ventures always seemed to teeter precariously on the edge of spectacular success or utter collapse, never quite landing on either side for long. He wore expensive suits, even when they were a little frayed at the cuffs, and his cologne, an aggressive, spicy aroma, always announced his arrival before he did, a whirlwind of cologne and boisterous laughter. He'd always been the charismatic counterpoint to my father's steady pragmatism, a whirlwind of ideas and charm, forever chasing the next big deal. When Mateo's will named Carlos executor of the estate, it felt natural, almost inevitable. "He's family, Elena," Mateo had once said, a faint smile playing on his lips, a hint of affectionate exasperation in his voice. "And he always means well, even if his timing is creative and his judgment a little optimistic." I trusted him implicitly, blinded by my grief and my father's own affection for his brother, and so did Leo, craving any semblance of paternal guidance. Carlos, with his booming voice and theatrical gestures, seemed to fill some of the void Mateo had left, wrapping us in a comforting, albeit performative, embrace of familial support. His presence a jarring, yet temporarily welcome, distraction from our raw pain. He spoke endlessly of honoring Mateo's memory, of growing the business, of securing Leo's college fund and my own professional future. His words a balm to our fresh wounds, soothing us with promises of continuity and care, making us believe he was truly on our side. Days blurred into weeks, weeks into months, each passing day deepening the illusion he wove around us. Carlos moved into the guest room, transforming the quiet hum of our grieving home into a constant flurry of activity. He took over the construction business with a gusto that initially impressed me. He had a natural charisma, charming clients and suppliers with his grand visions. But I began to notice subtle shifts in the company's operations. Fewer small, meticulous projects, the kind Mateo prided himself on, and more large, flashy proposals for sprawling developments that seemed to exist more on paper than in reality. He spoke of aggressive expansion, of diversifying into real estate development, a field Mateo had cautiously avoided, preferring the tangible solidity of brick and mortar. Meanwhile, he assured me he was meticulously managing Mateo's personal accounts, safeguarding the inheritance, preparing the necessary legal steps for probate, his hand firm on my shoulder, his voice low and reassuring. "Your father's legacy is safe with me, Sabrina," he'd say, a look of profound, feigned sorrow etched on his face. But his eyes, a shallow, restless brown, always seemed to dart away, never quite meeting mine, a tiny, unsettling detail I brushed aside as my own overwhelming grief, convincing myself he was simply uncomfortable with the weight of his new responsibility. By late 2023, a year after my father's death, the initial shock had faded into a dull ache, replaced by a growing, insistent unease. The cologne Carlos wore, once a sign of his presence, now felt cloying, suffocating, filling the house with a manufactured optimism that felt increasingly false. Leo was struggling in his first semester of college. The promised tuition payments from the estate hadn't materialized, leaving him increasingly anxious, facing mounting student loans. When I cautiously approached Carlos about it, he waved it off with a dismissive hand, a practiced gesture that irritated me more than reassured. "Bureaucracy, Elena? Lawyers, banks, it's a labyrinth, you wouldn't understand. But don't worry, I'm on it. Just a few more signatures." His reassurances felt thinner now, like a worn fabric, unable to conceal the growing hole beneath. The construction company, once a pillar of stability, felt wobbly, as if its very foundations were shifting. Familiar faces, loyal employees who had worked with my father for decades, were quietly leaving, their goodbyes laced with uncomfortable silence and knowing glances. Inventory seemed inexplicably low, and suppliers were calling with increasingly urgent, overdue invoices, their voices tinged with frustration. My architect's eye, trained to spot structural weaknesses, began to see cracks forming everywhere, cracks in the financial foundation of everything I thought I knew, cracks that suggested a deliberate, insidious collapse rather than natural decay, a pattern that whispered of rot from within. The unease curdled into outright panic, a cold dread that seized me by the throat when a crucial piece of equipment for a new project, a specialized crane required for a difficult lift, couldn't be ordered because the Mateo Rodriguez Construction Company credit card was suddenly declined. I called the bank, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs, a desperate hope clinging to the idea of a simple mistake, a bureaucratic error. The manager's voice on the other end was apologetic, formal, and utterly devastating, each word a hammer blow to my fragile sense of security. "Miss Rodriguez, I'm afraid the company's main operational account has been overdrawn for weeks. And as for your father's estate accounts, they were fully liquidated 2 months ago. Every cent. The funds were transferred to various offshore accounts." The words hit me like a physical blow, a punch to the gut that stole my breath. Liquidated. Empty. My inheritance. Leo's college fund. Our future. Vanished. A cold, nauseating dread washed over me, chilling me to the bone. Colder even than the ocean that had claimed my father, threatening to consume what little hope I had left. I confronted Carlos in the living room, the late afternoon sun casting long, accusatory shadows across the familiar furniture, intensifying the scent of my father's pipe tobacco, a ghost of comfort now replaced by the acrid stench of betrayal. "Carlos," my voice was tight, barely a whisper, a strained sound I barely recognized as my own. "The accounts, the estate. What happened?" "The bank said, liquidated." He flinched, visibly, his flamboyant confidence momentarily cracking, like a thin layer of ice over a dark, churning abyss. A flicker of something dark and desperate, almost animalistic, in his eyes betrayed the composure he struggled to maintain. He launched into a rambling, frantic explanation, a temporary restructuring, strategic investments in a new, highly confidential venture in the Caribbean, liquidating assets to maximize returns before a massive payout. His hands gesticulated wildly, his voice rising in pitch, becoming shrill and breathless, but the words were hollow, ringing with a desperate falseness I could no longer ignore. A frantic performance. He avoided my gaze, his eyes darting around the room, nervously scanning the walls as if searching for an escape route, a way out of the tightening net of my accusations, confirming my worst fears that he was not just incompetent, but actively deceitful, a liar woven into the very fabric of our family. That night, Carlos vanished. His expensive suits, his polished shoes, his overly perfumed presence, all gone, leaving behind only the ghost of that cloying scent. He left behind an empty guest room, the bed hastily made, a single, hastily scrawled note claiming an urgent business opportunity overseas, and a gaping hole in my trust, larger and more painful than the one my father's death had created. The note, crumpled in my hand, felt like a cruel joke, a final, mocking gesture. The house felt empty again, but this time the silence screamed not of grief, but of profound, sickening betrayal. The weight of his deceit settled on me, a crushing burden that stole my breath and clarity, replacing it with a burning, disorienting anger that threatened to consume me whole, leaving only ashes in its wake. I spent the next few weeks in a blur of frantic phone calls and dead ends, each one a fresh stab of frustration. Lawyers, banks, even local police. Everyone gave me sympathetic glances and bureaucratic shrugs, their words a meaningless drone of legal jargon and helplessness. Offshore accounts are notoriously difficult to trace, Miss Rodriguez. Without a clear criminal complaint, our hands are tied. Carlos, they said, was likely long gone, probably offshore, his tracks carefully covered by a web of shell corporations and hidden transactions. The $1.5 million estate, my father's life's work, his legacy, was simply gone, evaporated into the global financial ether. Leo was devastated, not just by the financial ruin, but by the soul-crushing realization that our uncle, the man who had offered so much comfort and pretended to be a stand-in father figure, was a thief, a manipulator, a ghost of a relative. The weight of my own guilt for having so readily believed him, for having endangered my brother's future, for having let Mateo down, was almost unbearable, a constant, gnawing pain in my gut that stole my appetite and my sleep. One sweltering San Diego afternoon, driven by a desperate, aimless search for answers, a primal need to connect with my father in some tangible way, I found myself sifting through old boxes in his dusty workshop. The air was thick with the scent of sawdust, old oil, and a pervasive melancholy, each particle a memory, each breath a sigh. The workshop, usually a place of vibrant creation, now felt like a mausoleum. Among his meticulously organized tools, each hammer, wrench, and saw gleaming despite years of use, a testament to his respect for his craft. I found a small, weathered notebook, its leather cover softened by years of use. It was a maintenance log for El Sueño, a habit my father kept for every piece of equipment he owned, a testament to his meticulous nature. Flipping through the pages, my fingers tracing the familiar loops and angles of his precise handwriting, I saw detailed notes on engine performance, fuel efficiency, minor repairs, and then a series of entries from the weeks leading up to his death, written in his familiar, precise hand, began to catch my eye, a chill colder than any air conditioning creeping up my spine. Minor fuel line corrosion. Monitor closely. Fuel filter replacement scheduled next week. Odd vibration in port engine at high RPM. These weren't the notes of a careless owner. These were the meticulous observations of a man deeply attuned to his boat, a man who wouldn't ignore warning signs, especially on the open ocean. A shiver, unrelated to the heat, ran down my spine, an instinct screaming that something was terribly wrong, a dissonant chord in the narrative of accidental death. It was during this period of raw vulnerability and gnawing suspicion that fate intervened. Or perhaps justice simply began to unfurl its long, slow hand. I was sitting in a small, independent coffee shop near my architectural firm, the aroma of roasted beans a bitter comfort, nursing a lukewarm latte, staring blankly at blueprints that suddenly seemed meaningless, my mind replaying the cold words of the bank manager. An older gentleman with a neatly trimmed silver beard and kind, observant eyes that held a lifetime of stories approached my table, carrying his own steaming mug. He introduced himself as Arthur Finch, a retired police detective. He recognized me from the local news reports about Carlos's disappearance and the stolen estate, his memory clearly sharper than mine in my haze of grief. "Elena Rodriguez, isn't it? I'm truly sorry for your family's loss, both your father and this betrayal you've suffered." His voice was gentle, tinged with genuine empathy, and for the first time in months, I felt seen. Not just as a victim, but as a person, a human being worthy of compassion. Arthur explained that he was volunteering at a local community center, helping families navigate complex legal issues, a way to keep his mind sharp in retirement. But the glint in his eyes, a keen, intelligent spark, suggested more. He admitted he also indulged in his passion for cold cases, often reviewing old police reports for puzzles that didn't quite fit, stories that nagged at the back of his mind. He'd read the original report on my father's boating accident, a case that had briefly made local headlines. "There were inconsistencies, Elena," he said, his voice dropping slightly, becoming more grave, his gaze unwavering, penetrating straight through my carefully constructed composure. "Your father was known, even by reputation in my circles, for his meticulous maintenance, his professionalism. The engine failure, while plausible, combined with the sudden, severe weather that day, it felt a little too convenient, a little too perfect. And then with your uncle's disappearance and the scale of the fraud, my instincts are screaming." My heart hammered against my ribs, a sudden, frantic drumbeat, louder than the gentle murmur of the coffee shop. He wasn't just talking about financial mismanagement. His eyes, clear and sharp, were silently asking a question I hadn't dared to voice, a terrifying possibility that had been lurking in the darkest corners of my own mind. "What kind of inconsistencies, Mr. Finch?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper, a raw, fragile sound, a cold dread twisting in my stomach, making the lukewarm coffee taste like ash. The pleasant cafe sounds faded into a distant hum as I leaned forward, hanging on his every word. He leaned forward too, his gaze intense, pinning me in place. "The damage to the boat's engine, specifically the fuel line, was described as catastrophic. But your father's log, the entries you shared with me from that notebook?" He'd noted minor corrosion, nothing indicative of such a sudden, complete failure. Small issues, yes, but he was addressing them. And the Coast Guard report mentioned the boat was found far off its usual course, much further south than Mateo typically ventured. A seasoned sailor like Mateo wouldn't make such a navigational error, even in rough seas. It all points to something more deliberate than an accident, Elena. Something planned. Something designed to look like an unfortunate, unavoidable tragedy. He paused, letting the words hang in the air between us, heavy with unspoken implication, a chilling weight that permeated every fiber of my being. The air conditioning in the cafe suddenly felt arctic, chilling me to the bone, sending shivers through my entire body that had nothing to do with the temperature. He wasn't just talking about theft, he was talking about murder, and the realization hit me with the force of a physical blow, stripping the air from my lungs, leaving me gasping for a breath that wouldn't come. The next few weeks were a descent into a suffocating, almost hallucinatory reality. The world, already warped by grief and betrayal, twisted into a grotesque, horrifying new shape, one where the most sacred bonds were capable of the most heinous acts. My father's death was no longer a tragic accident, but a calculated act of violence, perpetrated by a man I had called family, a man who had feigned sorrow at his funeral. This knowledge became a constant, suffocating weight, an invisible shroud I wore everywhere, chilling me even in the warmest San Diego sun. I barely slept, haunted by vivid nightmares, my father's face, serene in death, twisting into an expression of horror as he realized his brother's betrayal, the smell of burning fuel, the terrifying sound of the ocean's hungry roar as it swallowed him whole. The phantom taste of salt, bitter and metallic, lingered in my mouth, a constant reminder of the ocean that had become his grave and the dark secret it held. Arthur Finch, however, was a godsend. He worked quietly, meticulously, a man clearly driven by a profound, unwavering sense of justice, his presence a calm, steady anchor in my turbulent world. His small home office, cluttered with old police files, true crime novels, and crime scene analysis textbooks, smelled of old paper, lukewarm tea, and a lifetime of unsolved puzzles. He didn't promise miracles, only diligence, a promise he intended to keep. He started by revisiting the Coast Guard report with fresh eyes, cross-referencing every detail. Weather patterns from various meteorological stations, tide charts specific to that exact day and time, and my father's known fishing routes, mapping them out on a large topographical chart. He highlighted discrepancies, subtle but significant, the precise time of the reported distress call versus the actual window for the catastrophic engine failure, which seemed to shift under scrutiny, the uncharacteristic deviation from my father's preferred fishing grounds, placing him in an area known for stronger currents and unpredictable squalls. Each detail he unearthed, each quiet observation, chipped away at the facade of accident, revealing the sinister intent beneath, slowly but surely exposing the deliberate design behind the supposed tragedy. Our first major lead, the first tangible piece of evidence beyond speculation, came from an unlikely source: the remains of El Sueño. The Coast Guard had salvaged the wreckage, and after their initial investigation, it had been impounded at a remote, private dry dock south of San Diego, a forgotten graveyard of mangled vessels, awaiting insurance claims and eventual disposal. Arthur, using his old contacts and a respectful persistence, managed to get us access. The moment I stepped into the cavernous, echoing building, the air heavy with the metallic stench of salt, rust, and decay, my stomach clenched, a wave of nausea washing over me. Seeing the mangled hull of El Sueño, my father's pride and joy, twisted and broken, charred in places, was like seeing his body all over again, a brutal reenactment of his final moments. Arthur, however, wasn't there for sentiment. With a powerful LED flashlight and a keen, practiced eye, he meticulously examined the engine compartment, his brow furrowed in concentration. The Coast Guard report had primarily focused on the main fuel line, noting a catastrophic rupture. Arthur, however, directed his attention to a secondary, smaller fuel line, often overlooked by less experienced investigators, a line that ran parallel to the main one. He pointed to a section of the line, just before the fuel filter. It was almost imperceptibly crimped, then meticulously re-expanded, leaving behind faint, almost invisible tool marks, small indentations that spoke volumes. "Someone deliberately restricted the fuel flow here, Elena," he murmured, his voice low, almost reverent, as if speaking to the ghost of my father. Slowly, over time, this would cause intermittent issues, a loss of power, perhaps sputtering, but not a catastrophic engine failure right away. It would simulate a failing engine, making Mateo try to fix it, perhaps out at sea, frustrated by the unpredictable malfunctions. He then showed me a tiny, almost microscopic hole near the crimp, carefully sealed with a type of marine epoxy that my father, a professional boatman who prided himself on impeccable maintenance, would never have used. It was shoddy, unprofessional work. "This," he explained, shining his light directly onto the minuscule opening, "is where they introduced an accelerant. A small, slow leak of a highly volatile substance directly into the fuel line. When the engine was under strain, perhaps as Mateo was trying to fix the failing fuel delivery, trying to troubleshoot the issue far from shore, it would cause a sudden, explosive malfunction, a fiery backfire, making it look like a catastrophic engine failure, especially if the engine compartment was already saturated with regular fuel from the earlier crimp and the forced leak. My father hadn't just had an accident, he had been trapped in a death trap, meticulously prepared by someone he trusted, someone who had planned his demise with chilling precision. The sheer premeditation of it sent a fresh wave of nausea through me, mixing with a cold, righteous fury that ignited a fire deep within my soul. With this chilling revelation, the pieces began to click into place, forming a horrifying mosaic, each fragment a painful memory twisted into something sinister. Carlos had been systematically isolating my father in the months leading up to his death, a detail I now remembered with sickening clarity, each instance a fresh stab of guilt. "Don't bother Mateo, Elena," Carlos would say, a dismissive wave of his hand. "He's got a big project, needs his focus. I'll take care of everything else for him." He discouraged my visits to the boat, claiming my father needed to bond with his vessel alone before his long trips, or that he was fine-tuning something I wouldn't understand. He'd even insisted on being the one to fuel El Sueño for that final voyage, citing a special discounted fuel supplier he'd found, even shooing Mateo's usual assistant away. He was controlling every variable, every access point, setting the stage for his heinous act, manipulating the circumstances to create the perfect illusion of an accident. The discovery galvanized me. My grief, once paralyzing, transformed into a burning, focused resolve, a steely determination that hardened my heart against the lingering pain. This wasn't just about my money or my family's future. This was about justice for my father, about unmasking a monster who had worn the mask of family, about screaming his truth into the indifferent silence. Arthur then introduced me to Robert Chen, a forensic accountant he frequently collaborated with. Robert was a quiet man, with sharp, intelligent eyes behind thick glasses, whose mind worked like a precision instrument, sifting through numbers with an almost meditative focus. His office, unlike Arthur's, was stark and digital, filled with multiple screens displaying complex spreadsheets and financial graphs, a modern battlefield of data. He would tackle the other side of the equation, following Carlos's money trail, confirming the cold, hard motivation for murder. The fight had truly begun, a tangible battle against the darkness, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a flicker of hope, however grim, that the truth would finally emerge from the depths, illuminating the monster in our midst. Robert Chen began his forensic deep dive into Mateo's finances, meticulously peeling back layers of transactions that, on the surface, seemed innocuous but, under his focused scrutiny, screamed of deceit. We pored over years of bank statements, tax returns, and company ledgers in his sterile, quiet office, the only sounds the soft click of his keyboard and the gentle hum of his computer, a stark contrast to the emotional maelstrom within me. Robert pointed out a series of recurring, small transfers, almost imperceptible amongst the larger business transactions, from Mateo's personal account to an offshore account I didn't recognize, starting subtly 2 years before my father's death in early 2020. "These were authorized by your father, Elena," Robert explained, his voice low, almost a whisper, "but the purpose is vague. Business expenses, investment opportunities. Your father was a detailed man, methodical. He never left a transaction unexplained, not even the smallest. The amounts started small, a few $1,000s here, 10,000 there, barely noticeable amidst the larger flow of his thriving construction business, but they steadily increased, especially in the months leading up to the accident, like a slow, insidious bleed, draining his resources while he remained oblivious." Robert then cross-referenced these with Carlos's own publicly available financial records as much as we could access. Carlos, despite his flashy exterior, his expensive suits, and grand pronouncements, was deeply, irrevocably in debt. His successful ventures were consistently failing, leaving a trail of bankruptcies, defaulted loans, and unpaid judgments across various states, Florida, Nevada, even a failed casino venture in the Caribbean. "He was a house of cards, Elena," Robert said, pushing his glasses up his nose, his gaze piercing, constantly teetering on the edge of collapse, barely staying afloat. "And your father's estate, particularly the liquid assets, was the prize he needed to keep it from crumbling entirely. We unearthed hidden liens on Carlos's properties, defaults on multiple business loans, and numerous credit card judgments, some dating back years. He was desperate, far more so than any of us had realized, driven to the brink, and this desperation painted a clear, chilling motive for his actions, revealing the cold, calculating mind beneath the flamboyant veneer, a monster lurking beneath the charming facade. The deeper we dug, the more sinister the picture became, each new discovery a fresh wound, each detail solidifying the horrifying truth. Arthur, meanwhile, was expanding his investigation beyond the dry dock. He tracked down former employees of Mateo Rodriguez Construction who had left abruptly in the year leading up to Mateo's death. One, a foreman named Javier, who had been fiercely loyal to my father for over 20 years, spoke reluctantly about Carlos, his brow furrowed with discomfort, his hands twisting a worn baseball cap. "He was always asking Don Mateo about the boat," Javier recounted, his voice low, "asking about its vulnerabilities, joking about needing to upgrade the old engine, saying it was a death trap with a laugh that didn't quite reach his eyes. Javier also vividly remembered Carlos being unusually insistent about doing the final fuel-up for El Sueño, even shooing Mateo's usual assistant away, claiming he wanted to spend some brotherly time before the trip, a final send-off. This wasn't just idle curiosity, it was reconnaissance, a twisted form of reconnaissance, collecting vital information for his deadly scheme, meticulously planning every detail of his brother's demise. We discovered an old life insurance policy my father had taken out years ago for $1 million, naming Leo and me as primary beneficiaries. It was a standard policy, nothing unusual, a responsible act by a loving father. But it was another layer of motive for Carlos. As executor, he would have controlled the payout, potentially diverting funds before they ever reached us, creating an elaborate paper trail to cover his theft. The sheer premeditation, the systematic dismantling of my father's life and legacy for financial gain, was sickening, making my stomach clench with renewed nausea. I felt a profound sense of guilt gnawing at me, a constant whisper that if I had paid closer attention, if I had been less consumed by my own burgeoning career, if I had seen through Carlos's charade sooner, perhaps my father would still be alive. This painful realization fueled my resolve, sharpening my focus, transforming my personal pain into a powerful, unyielding demand for justice, a debt that would be paid. The emotional toll during this period was immense, a relentless assault on my mind and spirit. Nights were a torment of vivid nightmares. My father's face, serene in death, twisting into an expression of horror as he realized his brother's betrayal. The acrid smell of burning fuel, the terrifying sound of the ocean's hungry roar as it swallowed him whole. During the day, I would sometimes catch myself staring blankly into space, replaying conversations with Carlos, searching for hints for a warning sign I had missed, a flicker of evil in his eyes. The shame of being so thoroughly duped by Carlos, the man who had pretended to grieve with us, who had offered comforting words while plotting murder, burned like a constant fever, searing through my veins. Leo, though still struggling with his own grief and the brutal reality of our stolen inheritance, saw my determination, and it seemed to ignite a similar spark in him. He started helping with small tasks, organizing documents, asking pointed, insightful questions during our meetings with Arthur and Robert, his youthful innocence slowly hardening into a quiet resolve, strengthening the bond between us, making us a united front against the darkness that had tried to consume us both. Our combined evidence was overwhelming, a meticulously constructed edifice of truth against Carlos's web of lies. Arthur's meticulously detailed findings from the sabotaged boat engine parts, his expert analysis of the accident scene, cross-referenced with minute weather reports and my father's unwavering habits, painting an undeniable picture of mechanical sabotage. Robert's irrefutable paper trail of hidden financial transfers from Mateo's personal account to Carlos prior to death, his forensic accounting exposé of Carlos's desperate financial situation, confirming a clear, powerful motive that screamed greed. And Javier's poignant witness testimony about Carlos's unusual interest in the boat and his controlling behavior during the final preparations. We had a case not just for grand theft, but for first-degree murder. A horrific truth laid bare. Eleanor Vance, the formidable attorney I eventually retained, absorbed our findings with her characteristic calm and sharp intellect. She specialized in complex criminal cases, and her reputation for meticulous preparation and relentless pursuit of justice was legendary. Her office, high above the bustling streets of downtown San Diego, was modern, minimalist, designed for efficiency, much like Eleanor herself. She listened intently, her gaze unwavering, asking incisive questions that cut to the core of the evidence, her eyes missing nothing, dissecting every detail. "This isn't just about money, Elena," she said, her voice firm, devoid of extraneous emotion, but radiating absolute conviction. "This is a premeditated, calculated murder. We're filing criminal charges for first-degree murder and grand theft, and simultaneously a civil lawsuit for wrongful death and fraud to recover every penny of your father's estate and hold him fully accountable." The weight of those words, first-degree murder, hung heavy in the air. A final, horrifying confirmation of the monster my uncle had become, and the long, arduous fight that lay ahead. a fight I was now ready to wage with every fiber of my being. The legal machinery churned slowly, relentlessly, but Eleanor's meticulous preparation ensured every detail was precise, every piece of evidence organized with surgical exactitude. The FBI and Interpol were brought in, alerted to the international scope of Carlos's financial dealings and his flight. Carlos, believing he was safe, untouchable, had, true to his nature, resurfaced in Belize, living a lavish, if somewhat ostentatious life, using the stolen funds to create a new persona of a wealthy expatriate. He had invested in a sprawling beachfront property, purchased a luxury yacht he named El Nuevo Sueño, the New Dream, a grotesque mockery of my father's boat, and was attempting to start a new international development company, his old habits of grandiosity and reckless spending firmly intact. He was apprehended at a high-end resort, sipping a colorful cocktail by the pool, looking utterly indignant when the plainclothes officers quietly dispatched by Interpol approached him, interrupting his blissful stolen existence. His image of the suave, successful businessman crumbled instantly, replaced by a bewildered, petrified man, his face draining of color as the reality of his situation dawned on him. The call from Eleanor, informing me of his arrest, was a moment of profound, dizzying relief, a sudden lightness in my chest I hadn't realized was possible, a deep, cleansing breath after months of suffocating dread. The high-stakes murder trial took place in a federal courtroom in downtown San Diego, drawing national attention. The story of a beloved patriarch's murder for inheritance, a betrayal from within the sacred confines of family, captivated the media, resonating deeply with a public fascinated by the darker side of human nature. The courtroom was packed every day, jostling reporters, curious onlookers, and members of my father's construction community, all eager for justice, for answers. I sat with Leo in the front row, our hands clasped beneath the table, drawing silent strength from each other, our eyes fixed on Carlos. He sat at the defense table, his usual flamboyant suits replaced by a conservative, ill-fitting one, his face pale and drawn, stripped of his stolen grandeur, looking more like a frightened child than the ruthless killer we knew him to be. His lawyer, a slick, expensive-looking man, painted him as a loving brother, overwhelmed by grief and complex financial arrangements, a victim of circumstance, not a cold-blooded killer. His alibi was desperate, rambling, full of holes the prosecution meticulously exposed, unraveling like a cheap sweater under Eleanor's relentless scrutiny. My testimony was one of the hardest things I've ever done, a public excavation of my deepest wounds. I stood on the witness stand, the entire courtroom's gaze fixed on me, the air thick with anticipation, and recounted the agonizing unraveling of my world. I spoke of my father's unwavering love, his meticulous nature, the trust he placed in Carlos. Then, the growing financial discrepancies, the empty accounts, the crushing realization of the theft. My voice wavered only once, a catch in my throat. As I described the sickening moment Arthur revealed his suspicion of murder, the cold dread that turned to burning fury. "He wasn't just my uncle," I choked out, tears finally streaming down my face, hot and cleansing. "He was my father's brother. He used our grief. He killed him. He betrayed everything my father stood for, everything our family meant." The raw emotion in my voice, the profound sense of personal violation, seemed to silence the room, making even the hardened reporters shift uncomfortably, a collective gasp echoing through the silent chamber. Leo, his voice trembling but firm, his eyes glistening, testified next. He spoke of his shattered dreams of college, the loss of his hero, the gaping wound of betrayal from a man he had looked up to as a second father. His youth and innocence, juxtaposed with the brutal facts of Carlos's crime, left a powerful impression on the jury, clearly showing the widespread devastation Carlos had inflicted. Arthur Finch, the retired detective, delivered his expert analysis of the accident scene, his calm, authoritative voice laying out the scientific evidence with a clarity that left no room for doubt. He presented detailed diagrams of El Sueño's engine, highlighting the crimped fuel line, the microscopic accelerant hole, the specific type of marine epoxy used to seal it, an amateurish attempt at concealment. He methodically dismantled the defense's argument of a random accident, painting a clear picture of meticulous sabotage, explaining how the timing coincided with the rough seas to maximize the illusion of a tragic, unavoidable fate. He even provided a minute-by-minute timeline, showing how the weather conditions were deliberately exploited to coincide with the engine's planned failure, making the rogue wave scenario more plausible to first responders, ensuring the perfect crime. Then came Robert Chen, the forensic accountant. With his quiet, precise demeanor, he projected intricate spreadsheets onto the courtroom screens, detailing Carlos's mounting debts, his desperate financial situation, the consistent pattern of siphoning funds from Mateo's personal accounts even before his death. He showed the illicit transfers to offshore accounts, the systematic liquidation of estate assets, and the eventual purchases in Belize. He traced every stolen dollar, connecting it directly to Carlos's desperate greed, providing the irrefutable financial motive that drove him to murder. The numbers, stark and undeniable, painted Carlos not as a grieving brother, but as a predator systematically preying on his own family. His actions driven by pure, unadulterated avarice. Carlos's defense attorney, a master of obfuscation, tried desperately to discredit us, questioning my emotional state, casting doubt on Arthur's amateur investigation, and challenging Robert's interpretation of complex financial records. But Eleanor, during cross-examination, was a force of nature. She systematically tore apart Carlos's alibi, revealing glaring inconsistencies, minute by minute, day by day, until it lay in tatters. She exposed his history of failed businesses and hidden debts, painting a portrait of a man consumed by financial desperation and entitlement. A man who saw his brother's life as merely a means to an end. Her questions were sharp, incisive, and left no room for doubt, leaving Carlos flustered, visibly cornered, his usual charm completely evaporated, replaced by a sullen, simmering rage that occasionally flared in his eyes, betraying his carefully constructed facade of innocence. He was trapped, and he knew it. The jury, after a grueling week of testimony and just over a day of deliberation, their faces reflecting deep thought and moral outrage, returned a swift verdict. Guilty. The word delivered by the jury foreman with chilling clarity and resonance echoed through the stunned courtroom, a wave of profound, cleansing relief washing over me, so powerful it almost brought me to my knees. It was a single powerful word that confirmed everything I had fought for, everything I had endured. Tears, hot and heavy, freely streamed down my face, tears of release, of vindication, of a burden finally lifted after what felt like an eternity. Carlos Rodriguez was found guilty on multiple counts of first-degree murder and grand theft. He was sentenced to life in federal prison without parole, the judge emphasizing the premeditated nature of his crimes and the devastating impact on his family, on my father, and on the community that had once respected him. His desperate greed had cost him his freedom, his name, and any shred of dignity he might have once possessed, reducing him to nothing more than a convicted murderer. He was also ordered to pay $1.8 million in restitution to victims, the original $1.5 million stolen, plus interest and legal fees for the years of fraud and the costs of recovery. The public exposure was relentless and absolute. The sensational story of a family patriarch's murder for inheritance became a national phenomenon, covered extensively by true crime shows, documentaries, and major news outlets. Carlos's carefully cultivated reputation as a flashy businessman was irrevocably replaced by convicted murderer, his name forever synonymous with betrayal and unspeakable evil. My father's legacy, once tainted by deceit, was finally being restored, slowly but surely, brick by painstaking brick. The restitution, meticulously recovered from Carlos's frozen assets in Belize and the forced liquidation of his hidden properties there, amounted to the full $1.8 million. It was a financial victory, a tangible reclamation of my father's life work, ensuring Leo and I could rebuild the future Carlos had tried to steal from us. The construction company, though battered and bruised, slowly began to recover under trusted management, preserving Mateo's name, his vision, his enduring integrity. It wasn't just money. It was a symbol of justice, a testament to the enduring power of truth, a hard-won victory in the face of overwhelming odds. The path to closure was not a swift, easy one, but a complex, ongoing journey of rebuilding and redefining, a slow, often painful, reevaluation of everything I believed, every truth I held dear. The emotional scars remained, a permanent etching on my soul, a reminder of the fragility of trust and the depths of human deceit. A faint, persistent ache that would never fully disappear. But they were no longer open wounds. They were fading, healing, becoming a testament to my resilience, to the strength I had found within myself, a testament to survival, to a future reclaimed. I learned that while some wounds never fully disappear, true healing comes from reclaiming your narrative, from fighting for justice, and from transforming your pain into a source of strength and support for others. I used a portion of the recovered funds to establish Mateo's Legacy, a nonprofit organization dedicated to advocating for stricter executor oversight laws and providing crucial support for families facing elder financial abuse and suspicious deaths. We developed educational programs, offered legal resources, and built a network of support for victims who often felt isolated and helpless. I shared my story nationwide, speaking at conferences, to community groups, to legislative committees, turning my personal tragedy into a powerful force for change, ensuring that other families would not suffer the same fate. My voice, once silenced by grief and shame, became a powerful instrument for education and advocacy, a beacon of hope for others navigating the complex, often treacherous, landscape of family estates and hidden betrayals. I learned that while some wounds never fully disappear, true healing comes from reclaiming your narrative, from fighting for justice, and from transforming your pain into a source of strength and support for others, ensuring that your suffering was not in vain. My father's spirit, I knew, would approve, watching over us, knowing his legacy was not just rebuilt, but now fortified with truth and unwavering purpose. His quiet wisdom, once whispered to me in life, now echoed louder than ever, guiding me forward into a future I was finally strong enough to build.